When I was 15, I found a well in the woods behind my house. We'd already lived in that house for a few years by the time I found the well, and I was surprised that I'd never run across it before. And it jutted about 3 feet out the ground. The top had been covered with boards, and dead leaves framed its base and coated the boards almost like a camouflage. I marked the location in my head, making a mental map. I figured it might be cool to find my way back here at some point to read or to draw. It just seemed like a really peaceful spot. It was summer and I was kind of a loner with nothing really much to do. Most of the time, all I wanted was a peaceful spot just to be alone. It took me a year before I found the well again. I could swear that I'd mapped the path back to it in my head perfectly. It wasn't like it was that far away from my backyard, maybe a mile into the woods if that. I spent most of the rest of that summer just looking for it. I would walk the tree line for hours back and forth. I didn't even care about using it as a spot to hang out anymore, and I just wanted to prove to myself that I wasn't crazy. I asked my parents if they'd ever seen it during times when they would have gone for walks out there, but they just shook their heads and told me that they didn't know anything about a well. After a while I just gave up. It wasn't really worth the wasted energy. I figured it was out there somewhere. Perhaps I'd just been deeper than I thought on the day that I found it. Time passed, another school year came and went, and I had a birthday during that time. I turned 16, I started driving, found myself a girlfriend, and I went about my life as normal. The next summer I found myself bored on a day that my parents had both the cars, so I decided that maybe I should take a walk in the woods. I hadn't actually done it for a while, and besides, by that point I'd started smoking and wanted to keep it as far away from the house as possible, just to hide it from my parents. So about 45 minutes into the walk, I found the well. It was in the exact spot I'd originally mapped it out in my head, but had long since forgotten. Right there where I would have expected it to be a year earlier, still cold grey stone, still boarded up, still covered in dead leaves. I did a double take on it, honestly wondering how I couldn't have found it when I was looking for it. But I just kind of stumbled across it when I wasn't. I leaned up against one of the trees, about 4 yards from it, and stared at it, and I was totally baffled. I tried to shrug it off, but it was so weird. I pulled out a cigarette, and I just stood there smoking, tracing the well with my eyes, as if it was some kind of alien species. And that is when I first heard the whistling. It was soft and low at first. I had to strain a bit to even hear it. I looked around the tree line to see if I could spot anyone else walking around the property. Maybe my mum or dad had come home at some point and were taking a stroll through the trees just like me. I didn't see anyone though. No distant shapes, no figures wandering the tree line. I followed the direction of the sound of my ears as it started to get louder. I even recognised the tune, Mary Had a Little Lamb. It got louder and louder, till it seemed like the source should be right near me, and I soon realised that it was. It was coming from inside the well. I walked over to the well and started to clear the boards off the top. They weren't fastened to the top by anything, so it was just as simple as picking them up and tossing them into the grass. Once the last board was cleared, I stared down into the black pit, and a foul stench rose up from below like wet and rotting vegetation. I trained my ear back towards the whistling once again, just to be sure I wasn't going crazy, and sure enough it was echoing off the stone walls of the well before it reached my ears. I shouted, "Hello? Are you okay?" The whistling stopped. It just cut off at the sound of my voice. It was followed by a long and empty silence. It made me feel gradually more uncomfortable with each passing second. I swallowed hard and called out again, "Is somebody down there?" My question was once again answered with only silence. "Or am I going crazy?" I said under my breath, as I leaned up from the hole and took a drag of my cigarette. Suddenly sharp and manic laughter exploded from deep within the well. I nearly stumbled backwards from surprise. I quickly stuck my face back down into the top of the well and yelled with all I had, "Who's down there?" Another long pause. I felt like I was standing on the precipice of hell. The stench of rot grew ever stronger in my nose. I had to choke down each breath that I took. The silence was broken by what sounded like a low whimper, and then a voice. A voice that sounded exactly like my mother. "Honey, is that you? Please, you have to help me. My legs are broken." My mother had left for work that morning. I watched her drive away. She had called the house before I went out on my walk, asking if there was anything special I wanted her to pick up from the store on the way home. Whatever was talking to me was not my mother. That much I knew for sure. The imitation was perfect though. I stood above that well, staring down into the blackness. I was stunned and unsure how to respond to what I'd just heard. And then up from below come another voice. My father's voice. "Is this how you treat your mother?" it screamed. "Ignoring her pleas for help. You've always been such a rotten little shit. I should have smothered you in your crib or fed you to the dogs when you were a baby." I felt sick. Obviously whatever was down there was trying to mess with my head. As crazy as it seemed, that was the only explanation. Still, even knowing that, hearing those words in my father's voice hit me very hard. I backed away from the well. "Oh God," it screamed again in my mother's voice. "Help me, please. The rats are eating me." Its screams for help dissolved into a high-pitched squeal, and then it died out in a gurgling, retching noise. I turned from the well entirely and began to run away from it, back the way I came towards my house. I could hear whatever was down in that well behind me laughing. As I moved through the woods as fast as my feet would carry me, I could still hear it whistling. I should have been out of earshot, yet I continued to hear it. It whistled "Mary Had a Little Lamb" just like when I first heard it, but as I reached the edge of the forest, the tune changed to a funeral march. I sprinted to my back door, which I had thankfully left unlocked before I left. I got inside quickly and locked it behind me. I went into my room on the second floor of the house and I stared out of my window. It overlooked the backyard and it had a clear view of the woods beyond. Nothing was chasing me, at least not that I could see. Still, I sat at that window until my parents got home from work. I thought about telling them about what I had heard from the bottom of the well, but I knew that they wouldn't believe me. I ended up just keeping it to myself. I never went into those woods again, and every time my parents would go for their walks, I'd always tell them to be careful. I knew that there wasn't much else I could do. What was I supposed to say? If you run across a well out there, book it, Mum and Dad, that shit is evil? Yeah, I'm not sure that would have gone over real well. I would have been in therapy for a few years as well. They never did see it though. Or if they did, they never mentioned it. Months later, I started hearing someone whistle the funeral march outside my window every night for a week. Every time I'd look to see what was out there, I could never see anything. This happened every few months, and when it did, it would drive me crazy. I wouldn't be able to sleep at all. I'd just sit up in my bed and listen in terror, helpless to do anything about it, and my parents never heard it. Eventually I moved away from my parents' place and out to California. I got a job in the Bay Area working at some tech company. I met myself a nice girl and got married, and for a while I forgot about the well. That is until I went on a nature hike with my wife a few weeks ago. We were just walking along in the woods, talking and having a nice weekend with each other. We followed a trail that led us to a clearing, and I froze in my tracks when I saw it. A well, sticking about 4 feet out the ground, covered in dead leaves. The boards had been removed from the top and scattered about the base, exactly as I'd left it. My wife noticed I'd stopped walking with her, and turned to me with a puzzled look. "What the hell is wrong with you? You look like you've seen a ghost," she said, smiling and walking back towards me. "Do you see it?" I said, pointing a finger towards the well. She turned her head and then turned back to me with a raised eyebrow. "The well?" she said. "Yeah, I see it, so what?" I wanted to tell myself that it was a different well. It had to be, right? I hadn't seen it in over 10 years, and I was in a different fucking state. I knew though, just by looking at it, that it was the exact same fucking well. I found it again. I found it because I'd stopped looking for it. I grabbed my wife by the wrist and I started walking the other way. "What the hell are you doing?" she said as I dragged her along. "Let's get out of here," I said, then realising just how weird I was being, and I made a quick excuse. "I'm really starting to not feel good." "Okay," she said, still sounding puzzled but placing a comforting hand on my shoulder. About halfway back down the trail, I heard whistling. The same tune I heard the first time I looked down that damn well. I looked back behind me, half expecting to see some nightmare bearing down on me like something out of a horror movie. Instead, I just saw my wife, whistling "Mary Had a Little Lamb" and smiling as she walked.